Okay. Um, okay, so again, my name is Desiree Armas. I am a senior at St. Peter's. I'm about to graduate in a week. I'm an environmental studies.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Father. I majored in anthropology and environmental studies with a minor in social justice. And I'm going to ask you now to state your name, your full name, and then spell it slowly to the camera.
All right, Father Edmund Majewski, Edmund Majewski.
Okay, thank you. Today is June 9th, 2021. And today I will be interviewing you, Father Majewski, on your unique experiences at St. Peter's as an educator, as a Jesuit educator, in celebration of the 150th anniversary of St. Peter's University. And so now I'm going to get into the questions. Really, what I'm going to be looking at, since you're not an alum of St. Peter's, I'm going to be asking you a couple of questions on what your life like was before St. Peter's, what led you to St. Peter's, and then the different roles that you've had at the university, and as well as what the community looked like when you first got here versus what it looks like now. So our first question would be if you could please describe your, excuse me, your childhood, your family, and where you grew up before you came to St. Peter's University.
Okay, I grew up in New Jersey in Perth Amboy, which is about 20 miles south of Jersey City.
And what decade was this? Like when were you born? And
1951.
Okay, so you were born in 1951 and you grew up in Perth Amboy in the 50s.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It was a very industrial city then. Probably it's no longer that industrial, but at one time there were many factories in the city. Certainly a large immigrant population as well, although it's one of the oldest cities in New Jersey. At one time it was the capital of East Jersey, the colony of East Jersey. And I believe the Episcopal Church there, St. Peter's, is one of the oldest churches in the United States. So it goes back quite a while.
And did you grow up in the city or more in the suburbs?
No, I grew up in the city.
So you were you weren't a stranger to diversity.
No, as a matter of fact, at that time, some of the parents, or at least especially grandparents of different friends, spoke different languages. So that was very common to hear different languages.
Okay.
But I grew up, I have no brothers and sisters, so I grew up with my parents. I went to grade school and then high school in Perth Amboy, had a Catholic education. At that time, St. Peter's was a commuter school, so I considered St. Peter's, but I really never applied to St. Peter's. And instead, after high school, I went to Georgetown University and spent 4 years there. Certainly was a very rich experience. Being in Washington, D.C. at that time, it was a time of, I guess, certainly a bit of unrest too with during the Vietnam War.
Of course.
You had the protest, the civil rights movement at that time. And I got to know the Jesuits as well in Jesuit education. And I got to know a number of the Jesuit priests there, in particular, one who was now deceased, Father Thomas King. And I got to know him very well. And then I began to think about the priesthood. I guess it was during my junior year, and I kept in contact with him. And he encouraged me a great deal. And eventually I decided to apply to enter the Jesuit order upon graduation.
And how did you first make that connection with the Jesuit life?
It was primarily observing the professors at the university. Many of them seemed to be, I had a number of Jesuit professors, but also they seemed to be very dedicated, very hardworking, dedicated to the students. Some of them were living in the residence hall at the time. Not sure how they put up with all the noise since we were not always that quiet, but nevertheless, they did enjoy being with us. And
Wait, so Georgetown is a Catholic school?
it's a Catholic school, and it's the oldest Catholic and Jesuit institution in the United States.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes, so it's the first of all the Jesuit universities in the United States.
So did you pick Georgetown? Was that one of the factors that you were considering? You wanted to continue a Catholic education?
To some degree, yes, although I also applied to a number of non-Catholic institutions too. I'm trying to think, certainly to Rutgers, to I think it was Rider College, then a few other Catholic institutions too. So I would say that certainly the Catholic dimension was important, also just the liberal arts as well. And certainly I got to know many fellow students from different parts of the country, though in those days, I guess most of us came from the northeastern part of the country.
But you weren't familiar with the Jesuits by the time you
Not
started
really,
college?
no. I had no contact with the Jesuits prior to Georgetown, no.
Until you started taking their classes, and it looked like a good number of your professors were Jesuits, and you were interested.
Yes, yes, toward the end of my studies, not at the beginning, but toward the end.
So you knew by the end of college, you were really heavily considering becoming a priest, a Jesuit priest.
Yes, I was, yes.
Then that wasn't planned at all when you first got
No, it
into
was not
college.
planned before. No, that was not part of my plan at all.
And so most of that inspiration came from, you admired your professors and you wanted to continue in that tradition.
That's true, yes. They were men of prayer. They were very dedicated. They were certainly dedicated teachers as well. Some of them were active pastorally. Also, they were involved in many diverse disciplines as well. Theology, philosophy, languages, literature, history, sciences.
Oh, so you also liked how you can be flexible within that
Well,
life.
that was part of it too, because the order certainly is very flexible in many ways, that we are an order that is certainly a teaching order to some degree, but yet we also are involved in parish work, retreat work, various ministries among the poor, social justice. So there's a great diversity of opportunity of ministry within the Jesuit order, as opposed to maybe some of the other orders or the diocesan priesthood, which is focused primarily upon parish work.
And that component of social justice, did that also pique your interest in becoming a priest, a Jesuit priest?
That wasn't really the main interest at the time. I think it was more learning and probably spirituality as well, celebrating the sacraments, the Mass.
Okay.
And
Can you
then,
tell
of
me?
course, after, pardon?
Oh, go ahead. You can finish your thought.
And then after that, of course, then I entered the society, and I spent 2 years at Wernersville, which was our novitiate in Pennsylvania, near Reading, Pennsylvania. Very beautiful place. And I think there were 12 of us who entered that year.
And what year did you officially become a Jesuit?
Okay, I entered in 1973.
1973. And when did you start working at St. Peter's?
St. Peter's, I came here in 1993.
1993. So can you tell me a little bit about those 20 years before St. Peter's?
All right. I spent 2 years at the novitiate, and the novitiate is a time of getting to know the society. We took courses in Jesuit spirituality, studying the Gospels and the New Testament, the history of the order. But also, I guess the main focus was spirituality and making what is called the 30-day retreat, which is a retreat in silence with an individual spiritual director in which you basically follow the life of Christ and then decide ultimately whether or not you have a vocation to the order and to take vows within the society. So it was a very rich experience at that time. Also, we were engaged in various, during our time there, also we were engaged in various experiments in which we went to serve the church in different areas. I remember I worked with a Maryknoll priest in Virginia, which was an area that was not very Catholic at all. So he was dealing with a small Catholic population in a very rural area.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked in a nursing home on one of the Indian reservations for the Native Americans in South Dakota. I guess I was teaching catechism there. Then also I worked in a cancer hospital in New York City, Calvary Hospital, which still exists, and we would do the nursing care work during the day, but then in the evening we would come back in clerical attire and then try to console the patients and their families as well. So that was a very interesting, some ways difficult but yet rewarding experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of that period, I took vows, the traditional vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience in the society. And then I moved on to the study of philosophy at Fordham University. And I spent 2 years at Fordham University. All priests are required to study a certain amount of philosophy as part of our training.
Okay. So you valued the education, the discipline, and clearly you valued the spiritual component. I think that's probably one of the more outstanding uh, uh, things about attributes about Jesuit life um, that interested you the most, and you continued in that path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have interviewed. I have interviewed another Jesuit, and they also talked about that social service component, and it's clear that that's kind of what all Jesuits are expected to do. And so you traveled from community to community. Um, so at the end of those 20 years, what made St. Peter's attractive to you? What was it? The diversity? Was it what the school stood for? Was it need? Go ahead and talk a
It's
little bit
hard to
about that.
say. It's hard to say because prior to being at St. Peter's, I taught at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia for a few years. But there was an opening here, and I guess Father Tom Sheridan, who's now deceased, he was head of the department, and he contacted me and said, "Well, we have an opening. Why don't you visit us?" I did, and then I also got in contact with the rector at the time, the Jesuit superior, Father John Rinn, who taught history for many years here as well. I got to know the faculty briefly, and also they told me about St. Peter's, about the students, and I decided this would be a good move to come to St. Peter's. It was a small school, not an overly large school. At that time, it was only a college, not yet a university, but certainly had a very dedicated faculty. Also, the dedication to the liberal arts, a strong liberal arts core. I felt that was very important. And so I came to St. Peter's then and began teaching in the department,
Oh, so
1993.
so you came as a professor, a theology professor.
Yes, because I had
Okay.
studied, prior to coming to St. Peter's, I had studied in Boston, and then also I had studied in Rome to get my doctorate as well.
Your doctorate in.
My doctorate is in systematic theology, which I got from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, which certainly was another part of my experience too, which was very rich. Being in Rome during these years, I lived in a house. The residence was located 1 block from the Pantheon. So I would go
Oh
past the
wow.
Pantheon almost every day. From the roof of the residence, which was built, it was about 500 years old, a huge residence. You could see the Dome of St. Peter's in the distance. I lived with Jesuits from all over the world, from Europe, South America, Africa, Asia, numerous countries.
Hmm.
So it was a very rich experience. And of course, going to the university, there were professors from all over and taking courses, and then of course, then eventually writing a dissertation. That was all very rewarding.
And how many years were you at the
I was
university?
there, I guess 4 years.
Oh, okay. So you were there a long enough time to truly immerse yourself. Wow, that must have been great. And what
It
years
was really,
were they?
it was really great because you could walk around the city. You lived there, so you really
Mhm.
weren't a tourist. You got to know the
Mm.
city, and in the afternoon, I could take a walk to the Coliseum or to
All
St.
right.
Peter's, come back,
Mhm. Did you pick
the
up some
Spanish
Italian?
Steps. Yes, we spoke Italian in the house, although some of my classes, actually, my classes were in a combination of English, some Italian, and I
Mm.
guess one class or two in French.
Oh, well, have you been able to retain some of that Italian that you were able to learn?
Not as much, unfortunately, since I don't get much of an opportunity to use it.
Right. Well, I mean that it sounds, you briefly covered it and it sounds amazing. You were so close to all of these different attractions. So, um, okay.
It
So
was it
I,
was
mhm.
remarkable because you were not a tourist. It was basically your home for several years, so you got to know the city very well.
Yeah, and I think that's like a common feature of living in Europe, how you're sometimes you forget that wherever you grew up in, that the town, the city is like thousands of years old,
Hmm.
which is a concept so different compared to what we're used to here in the US.
That's
Um,
true
mhm.
because everything was all that I had studied about Rome when I was taking Latin many years ago. Well, there I was in Rome with all these monuments.
Of course, of course. Well, I'm glad you really enjoyed your time there, and it sounds like, it brings up really good memories.
It does,
Um,
yes.
yeah.
Hmm.
So now going into the 90s, you are a professor. You start off as a professor at St. Peter's. So by the 90s, was it now St. Peter's has this image of it being an incredibly diverse school. It's a Hispanic servant institution. Was that the case in the 90s when you first started working at St. Peter's?
Maybe a bit less so. Um, Although on the other hand, St. Peter's has always served an immigrant population. So if you go back to the 40s, the 50s, you would have mainly Irish, German, Polish, Italian.
Mhm,
But then over the years, you had of other groups too.
mhm,
Certainly students from Latin America, but then later on, Middle East, different parts of Africa, Eastern Europe.
mhm.
Um,
So not so
Also, I think with
much.
some of our, pardon?
Oh, just
So,
not so not so much in the 90s.
no, not as much in the 90s, but it was beginning. It was beginning. I
Okay.
think it probably changed somewhere around maybe 2000, 2005 or so.
Hmm.
Became much
Uh,
more international.
Was was that in accordance to the change in Jersey City? Like, were the demographics of Jersey City changing and tune with the demographics of the college?
I would think so. That's my impression, because even if you look at the restaurants in Jersey City in the 90s and the restaurants today,
Hmm.
you probably could have almost any type of meal you want today, which was probably not the case 25, 30 years ago.
Mhm.
So it is much more diverse. Also, you hear many languages being spoken even on the streets.
Of course. Okay. Okay. Because that brings us into um, sort of our next question. What were the larger societal issues during your time at St. Peter's, and how did it impact you and the St. Peter's community? So if you can maybe touch upon some of the most prominent events, tragedies that have occurred since your time here, that have impacted you, that have impacted the university. Um, so you can, if you can expand on that.
I think 9/11 certainly was a major event that
Mhm.
affected many people. I forget now how many of our alumni were killed in New York City. I think close to 50.
Oh, wow.
Um, and when the towers went down, we could see them going down. It was a rather horrible experience. I remember going to class and class had math that day. The student chapel, and normally I would, as I would wait for them to ever look back. So I about, and they seemed to be anxious, talking,
Mhm.
and then I guess rumors were going around that the building was on fire. Then there were rumors that other buildings were being attacked. As I recall now, we ended the day very early. Classes were canceled maybe around 10 something. I don't think we even completed the 10 o'clock class.
Oh, so
And I
almost
came back,
immediately.
and then I was looking almost immediately, and no one knew what was really going on. And I think for about 2 or 3 days, we, everything was closed in this area. You couldn't go into the city. There was fear of perhaps trucks going into the city with bombs.
Oh.
Uh, so that everything was closed for several days, and slowly things began to open up. But of course,
Mhm.
you could see the smoke for I forget how long from the
Right.
ruins of the World Trade Center. Uh,
And were you living in near the campus at the time?
I was living in Gothic Tower, so actually I was watching from the ninth floor the buildings, and all of a sudden you thought there was a building where there had been a building. All of a sudden it got brighter and brighter, which meant the building had just collapsed. So the second
Mhm.
tower, I saw the second tower collapsing. Also, some of the priests who were not teaching at that time, they were asked to go into the city in case they had to anoint any Catholics who were dying and give them the last rites. And when they got to the Hudson River, they were told by that time that there would be no survivors. And I guess that was very shocking too, because
Oh my
a lot of
God.
people thought, well, there'd be a lot of injured people, and there
Mhm.
were very few injured. Most people were simply killed. So that was a very,
Mhm.
I would say, a very difficult time, because a number of the people at St. Peter's had relatives who were who were killed in that tragic event.
Mhm. And so, amidst all the tragedy, you're trying to get yourself together. Students are
Mhm.
trying to get themselves together. Everything shuts down. After that, how does did you notice a change? Like, how did the college respond to 9/11? What were some things that you noticed that weren't uh, that wasn't normal before that became normal at the university after 9/11?
Yeah, I think there was an interest in people maybe going to church, going to mass, praying. I think attendance went up, even daily masses at that time. Also, many people did lose loved ones or friends too, so that was,
Mhm.
I think, hard for many people. Uh,
Um,
though
as
slowly things did come back.
and as we know, soon after 9/11, President Bush embarked on his war on terror, and we entered into the Iraq War. How did the university deal with that? What were the students like? How were you during that time?
I guess the reactions were mixed. Some supported the war, some did not. Some thought it
Mhm,
was an overreaction. On the other hand, I guess it was the fear that something had to be done,
mhm,
that the Taliban did have a base there, that they could continue to attack the United States and other countries.
mhm.
I guess a number of students even volunteered for the military after graduation. It did go to the Middle East.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
yeah, there were mixed reactions at that time. Just what were we getting into?
Right.
Would we be able to change things or not?
So
Even
these new conversations, right? Terrorism, right, wasn't something that was what's the whole conversation around terrorism, right? In that concept, it
there's a
was
lot
it.
of talk, certainly about terrorism, because prior to 9/11, um, you could go into any building in New York City. There was no, very seldom did you have to show any type of ID. There was no concern about
Mhm,
terrorism, certainly going on planes, trains.
mhm.
There was no concern at all, really. That all changed very quickly.
Right, there was this unease, this anxiety, maybe even paranoia, justified, of course, but I think um, how the government moved, right, obviously influences how institutions move in general in St. Peter's, right? Um,
Hmm.
it probably did what it could to help students at, during that time. And considering the proximity to the city, did you ever feel like Jersey City might be, under threat? Did the city do something during that time um, that you remember?
I'm
What?
not
Oh,
sure if people felt, well, we were so close to Jersey City. Uh, Certainly also because of the bombing, I recall the path was shut down for several weeks, and also the path to the World Trade Center, that line was shut down maybe for over a year or so. They had to repair that line and then rebuild
oh,
the station as well.
of
That took a
course.
number of maybe several years. And that was one of the actually experiences that many people had when they went into the city for the first time once the line opened. That at that time, you the station was not completely constructed, so you would see the area where the towers had collapsed, and that was a very eerie feeling that you would
Mhm.
all of a sudden come out of the tunnel and you would see this area where so many people had died.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing your perspective, during that time in U.S. Modern history. now, you know, moving away from that particular moment, are there any other things that were happening in the community that you recall that affected St. Peter's, that affected you?
A year and a half, COVID, certainly that has
Mm,
affected us all in so many ways,
mhm,
because it came so suddenly upon us.
mhm.
Uh, Even the changeover from normal classroom teaching to remote learning, I think that was a challenge for everyone, especially for the faculty.
And what were some of those challenges?
To be honest, most of the faculty had never done any Zooming. I think we heard about Zoom, but
Mhm,
most of us had not had any contact with Zoom.
mhm.
Also, just all the work with Blackboard. There were certainly some faculty were teaching online, but most were not. So most were not familiar with Blackboard. I think that was very difficult to make the adjustment to switch everything over to remote learning.
Of course.
Uh, well, I must say, our faculty, we had certain leaders in the faculty, Dr. Suri especially, who was very good. And there were training sessions, I guess, in back in March, because originally we were supposed to go home for go remote for maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks and come back, and then of course we never did.
Mhm.
And most of the even those who were training us were not all that familiar with the technology, but
Oh
yet they
no.
became more familiar over time.
Mhm.
And last summer, actually, we had many courses, probably several courses every week, for the faculty to train us in using this new technology, which was certainly very helpful to us.
Oh, I'm
It's
glad.
been a
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah, no, of
Also a
course.
challenge for our students too,
Mhm,
to become familiar with the technology, but also it's part of the problem with remote learning is you are not in contact with real people.
mhm.
I think many of the students felt that something was missing, the component of face-to-face learning.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, no, COVID did. Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. Just let me know. But yes, COVID uh, definitely revealed some of the issues already at St. Peter's. Um, and you know, as a student, right, accessibility is something that remains a priority. And I'm glad that that very much necessitated training for folks that weren't familiar with Blackboard, right?
Hmm.
Especially were able to be, I'm hoping, adequately trained, right? So that students can access their course materials. And it took COVID to finally, you know, alert the university that this was much needed training.
Hmm.
With Zoom, as a student, I empathized, right, with professors who had a hard time not only making sure that Zoom didn't go wrong, because we both know that Zoom can go wrong at any time. There's a lot of room for error. But
That's true. Hmm.
mhm. But also trying to maintain some sort of um, environment, right? Virtual environment where students are engaged. It was difficult already in person, and over the computer it can feel much more alienating. And I'm sure that faculty, you know, were struggling with all these things in different ways than students were. And I'm sure, you know, that came with its own set of challenges, you know, behind the scenes. Um, so uh, so COVID definitely took a toll on St. Peter's. Um, and maybe as a Jesuit on the campus, were there any other things that you did notice that affected maybe like the religious life, like the ministry over the past year or so?
Well, the ministry was very strange in a way because I'm not involved in St. Aidan's, but we did have masses, Zoom masses, beginning last March from the community chapel. And every day we had a daily mass that was Zoom. And then on Sundays and Saturdays, we had two masses. I think there was one in English, one in Spanish, and that was Zoom. Then the
Mm,
Easter Mass was Zoom, so that the church really was not open until sometime, I think, in the summer, maybe July, and only a very limited capacity as well, although that's changing right now.
mm,
So we had the Zoom masses until sometime in the early summer when we discontinued the daily masses and the church was opened up again. I would say that's the most unusual aspect that I noticed as a priest, that normally, I think, in American history, even world history, whenever you had tragedies or wars, the churches have been open, even during World War II, World War
mhm,
One.
mhm,
People flocked to churches, and now they couldn't go to church, or even the question of burying the deceased too. They couldn't have a normal funeral mass, a normal wake.
mhm,
Yes, they had gravesite burials with only a handful of family members.
mm,
So I think that was very difficult for those who were mourning. Also, the elderly too, who were in nursing homes, that they were in severe lockdown because they were afraid of having someone with the virus coming into the nursing home.
mhm.
So that was, I think, very difficult for the elderly as well.
The death rates in nursing homes and residences were astronomical. Yeah, that was one of the biggest concerns amongst older folks here in the US.
As a matter of fact, at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, where I had lived for several years, there is a retirement center with nursing care for older Jesuits who are infirm. And I guess back in last year in April or late March, they lost 6 priests to COVID. That someone, perhaps someone on the staff,
Mhm.
had the virus but didn't know it. And then it spread through the infirmary, and then there were 6 priests who died within a matter of, I guess, a week.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so that was
Yeah.
very tragic. I actually knew most of them too.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So
And so it was kind
sorry.
of a shock because most of them were not that ill, but yet they got the virus. And I guess part of the problem too with the virus is you don't know who really has it and who doesn't.
Hmm.
You can have it, but you don't know it.
Right. Right. No, it's something that I don't wish on anyone. My father got COVID and he was in the hospital for 30 days.
Hmm.
That took,
Oh my.
yeah, that took a piece of me, that took a piece of him, right? He's still in recovery mode. He was able to
Hmm.
bounce back somewhat, but he's also like, a little older.
Hmm.
He's in his mid 60s. So
Okay.
I do, seriously, I am in solidarity with some of the older folks that they don't necessarily have the full autonomy to be able to get up and leave, right? That's their only
That's true.
home.
Yes.
And sometimes in nursing homes, they don't have the best conditions. And that
No.
also,
No.
fed the higher death rates among seniors here in the
No.
country. So yes, COVID definitely revealed a lot about how our system works, and
Hmm.
um, it
Sometimes
definitely,
it works and sometimes it doesn't.
right, and it definitely did affect St. Peter's, um, because do you think? No, I think we will move on to some of the other things that have happened during your time here. I'm wondering if your role has changed since you were here in the 90s. Have you done other things besides strictly teaching in the department, or have you just stayed in your teaching role?
No, mainly in the teaching role, although I've been active from time to time in campus ministry. I do say mass from time to time. Mainly, most of my work has been in teaching.
Mhm.
In the past, I used to give a lot of tutorials, which I haven't been doing now because there's less of a need. But I used to do a lot of tutorials and one-on-one courses for students as well.
Okay, and your courses, they tend to be some of them the intro, or you did a whole variety?
Do a variety, certainly the intro, the introduction to world religions, the introduction to Christianity, but also Christology, who is Jesus. I did a course on that last semester, and then the fall I did a course on the church. Sometimes I teach a course on St. Augustine. Also, I've been teaching the honors courses now for about maybe over a dozen years, I guess, and I've experimented with those courses because I find the students are certainly very enthusiastic in the honors courses.
Mhm.
Also, I have them give longer presentations. As you recall, in your course, you gave a presentation in class.
Yes, I do remember.
And students normally write a long paper. The second part of the course, the Christianity course, they do a research paper on a topic that we agree upon, and then they give a presentation. Although that was a bit more difficult this year because students did not have easy access to the library. They had access, but it wasn't as easy as normally. So I think some of them were challenged. Also, I find
Mhm.
students do not like books. They like online sources. I
Like
think there's a bit of a,
websites.
yeah, websites. And there's a danger with some of the websites because some of them are very good and some of them are not so good.
Hmm. No, yeah, of course, of course.
And
Uh,
students, they seem to, like to, maybe it's the ease of the internet. I don't know. In some
yeah,
ways, I think we become captive to the internet.
yeah, I agree in some ways, for sure. Um, okay, so you have done a little bit of everything. You have been some active in the Jesuit mission of St. Peter's.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just some other things that I wanted to touch upon that I think were pretty remarkable. Um, Superstorm Sandy, I think back in 2012. Do you remember what St. Peter's was like during that time?
Yes, it was a difficult time because for several days, of course, we had no electricity
Mhm.
and we had no classes for I forget how many days now. And slowly the electricity came back, but I remember it came back on the block behind the university, and yet the rest of the block and the university didn't get the electricity until maybe 4 or 5 days later. So it came back very unevenly.
Mhm.
We lost class time. Also, some of the students found it difficult to get to Jersey City because there were problems with the number of the bridges. I think some of the trains as well, with regard to commuting.
Mhm.
So that was a bit of a challenge. We managed to finish the semester okay, and then
Good.
everything went back to normal.
Yeah. Were there issues in the dorms, like with students not being able to, uh, did they have access to heat and water and electricity, or did they also lack for a few days?
Well, they lacked certainly electricity and heat. However, I guess food was brought in. I can't remember now from maybe another campus where they had more access to electricity, but food was brought in. Perhaps not a hot meal, but certainly food was brought into the students. Also, I think campus ministry was available for anyone who needed counseling or help during that time.
Hmm.
But I don't think that was that of a severe problem then. It was not as traumatic because no one really got sick. Whereas with COVID, of course, it was much more tragic, especially the
Okay.
loss of life.
Okay. Okay. No, that's good to hear that, the most intense part was losing power, right? And the school was able to
Yeah,
bounce
yeah.
back. The school took care of
Hmm.
students. Um, and that's good. That's good. Um, so now I want to, this is our last question. Um, you know, what was one of your favorite moments here at St. Peter's? And if you can, maybe touch upon what are some of the relationships that you have been able to form here on campus?
You know, certainly with regard to relationships, there's so many. Over the years, students, you get to know students, you sometimes have contact with them outside the classroom. I kept in contact with a few students over the years. Um, Also, I guess with the faculty as well. This certainly is a very friendly place, and people are willing to help each other. They get along with each other. Gosh, there's so many people on the faculty that I've gotten to know over the years. Some of them are no longer here. One could talk about, say, Dr. Surrey. David Surrey has been very helpful in helping the faculty deal with the technology and
Mhm.
getting to be able to remain in contact with our students during this time. Also, I've worked on so many committees with different members of the faculty. Uh, so, I mean, there's certainly many influential faculty who have had a great impact upon St. Peter's. I
Hmm.
could go back, someone like John Walsh in the English department, Dr. Parmigiano, who taught history for many years, Kathy Monahan in the English department, Joyce Henson, our former dean, Dick Petriello. Certainly, I think he had a great impact. Dr. Poliani certainly has been a part of St. Peter's for many, many years. I think she's been here now about 50 years.
Oh, wow.
Pat Redden is a good friend of mine. She retired about a year ago, full time, although she's teaching part time. Also, certainly the staff too; they're very dedicated. I think of our secretary for many years who retired. She was working for the let's see, theology and economics. Peggy Greenwood certainly was very helpful for many years. So there's so many different people who have been part of this university, and their dedication, I think, is incredible.
Mhm.
That they're willing to help students and go beyond the normal obligations and help students who have special needs
Mhm.
or difficulties, personal problems.
Well, yes, that's one thing that I really did value in my professors. When I was in very difficult times, um, I could count on their empathy and understanding. We're just going to
Hmm.
pause. Okay. So you shared about some of your favorite people here on campus. Can you tell me one of your favorite moments here? Maybe an event or um, you know, with students, with faculty, um, you know, if you can please share.
I guess one of my favorite moments was a number of years ago. I directed a senior thesis for a student. I guess he was number one or two in his class. He was a valedictorian, Billy Murphy. This was about,
Mm,
gosh, maybe 15 years ago or a dozen years ago. And I directed his thesis, and he did very well. And when he had his little defense, I was there, and a number of other professors were there as well because they were, I guess, presentations immediately after his, so they came early, and everybody was controlled by his presentation, and people began to ask him questions, and he answered the questions very well. So I thought that was wonderful to see a student who was able to accomplish something like that and crown his work, academic work as a student at St. Peter's. And they were students, other students too, that frequently, some of the, I guess, juniors or sophomores who are beginning to think about an honors thesis, will they go to some of the presentations just to see what it's like.
Mhm.
I think
Yeah,
when you see a student
mhm.
doing something like that, I feel that I've accomplished something and I've helped them accomplish something as well.
No, for sure. My advisor for my thesis was Dr. Brown, and she was my personal cheerleader. She
Hmm.
really was there from start to finish, and you can tell she was, one of the most. She was incredibly helpful during that journey, but she was very proud of me on that day. Um, so I'm sure that that must have been a really great moment for you and your advisee, and uh,
Hmm.
you know he must have also been very thankful of all the effort that you put into his thesis, because I finished that part of my life and it
Hmm.
was very stressful. But once you present it and you submit it, I actually have the bound copy now. It feels like you accomplished something very great, and I'm very proud of my work.
Yeah,
So
you should be, you should be.
yeah.
And also sometimes I think students are fearful before their presentation because they don't know what to expect. But then once they've gone through it, they realize, well, it's not all that difficult. And maybe in the future they'll be doing similar things and they'll be able to give presentations and speak before an
Mhm.
audience and have very few fears.
Right, especially when I learned that a dissertation is can be hundreds of pages long.
Hmm.
that
That's true. That's
that
true.
intimidates me a little bit. But it was a good, I think it's also good practice, and you're able to see how well you do or how well you don't do in that kind of environment. But yeah, no, I'm glad that you had that experience. Um, again, this conversation was uh, in honor of St. Peter's 150th anniversary. I'm wondering if there's any closing statement you'd like to say, that'll go on the record, something that has been on your mind that you would like to share with all of us.
Well, I think it's a great anniversary, 150 years, and certainly we're building upon all those who have gone before us.
Mhm.
That we're not starting from scratch, but we're building on the contributions of others. And when I mentioned a number of the faculty that I got to know, and the list is a very small list because I'm sure I left out dozens of people, but certainly I think all of us are in this together,
Mhm.
and also our students as well. I think our students are very interesting students because they come from different backgrounds. And before I came to St. Peter, someone told me you'll be surprised by the students how interesting and diverse they are. And I think that is true. That is true.
Are we, what are the reasons that you have decided to stay all this time, all these years, the students?
I think so. I think so. Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, it is a one of a kind experience, just how diverse the school is. That's like one of my favorite things about St. Peter's. And I'm glad that that also has, had an impact on your life as well. Um,
Hmm.
okay, so let me end the recording. Thank you so much, Father
Okay.
Majewski.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me end the recording. Um,